Good afternoon, and let me begin with confirming to you that if you intended to be on our Skanska Steps to Net Zero webinar, you're in the right place. My name is Adam Crossley. I'm the Director of Environment for Skanska UK. I'm joined here on my left by my colleague, Carbon Manager Conor McCone, and on my right by one of our Executive Vice Presidents, Katy Dowding. And just before we start, it's just turned 1 minute past the hour. Perhaps a few people are still joining, getting comfortable to watch the webinar. I'm just going to deal with a couple of housekeeping points before we push on with the formal content. And those are 2 points. The first is we've got so much we want to communicate to you today that we're not going to have time to do a live Q&A as part of the webinar. But we do want to hear all your questions and any comments you may have. So please do ask any questions or make any comments on the Teams live Q&A function that you should see on your screens. And over the subsequent days, we'll answer all the questions, we'll answer them comprehensively, and we'll send you out a transcript so that you can see your question and all the other questions as well. So that brings me to my second housekeeping point, which is the following. Also in due course, we'll follow up with each of you with that Q&A transcript that I just mentioned, with a recording of this webinar, and also with some information about how to get into contact with me and with some other people across Skanska UK. Should you find anything in the webinar content that you want to follow up on, or you want to partner with us, or you want to chat to us about further. So that's just a couple of housekeeping points before we start properly. And with that dealt with, I'm delighted to hand over to one of our Executive Vice Presidents, Katy Dowding, to formally welcome you to the webinar. Katy.
Thanks very much, Adam. And good afternoon, and welcome to Skanska UK's Steps to Net Zero webinar. So I'm Katy Dowding, and I'm Executive Vice President for Operations, and I'm a member of the Executive Management team here at Skanska UK. Some of you may also know me for some of my industry-wide initiatives that I'm involved with, such as Building the Future Commission and the Construction Productivity Task Force. And I'm delighted to be here today with Adam and Conor. So there's plenty of you joining the webinar today. I'm delighted it's not just internal people from Skanska. We've got a number of external attendees as well. So we have our customers joining us, we have our stakeholders joining us, we have our suppliers and our partners joining us. So welcome to you all, and thank you for taking the time. So a little bit about Skanska UK, for those of you who may not be as familiar with us. We're part of one of the world's largest global development and construction organisations. And it's an organisation that's been 135 years in the making. So we've been around for a while, and we've been in the UK since 2000. With over 30,000 employees across the world bringing their knowledge and experience to the organisation, and 3,500 people in the UK. Globally, we operate in the Nordics, Europe, and the US. So, why are we here today doing this webinar? Well, you'll hear from Adam and Conor a bit later on that we actually set our net zero target in 2019. And that was even before the UK government had set their target. And they'd set that target for the UK. So we were already ahead of the curve there. So why did we do that? Well, the executive management team here, we knew how important this was going to be for us. This is part of a global challenge, and it's absolutely in line with our core values as an organisation. We also realised that we needed to plan, we needed to invest, and we needed to scale up to meet the increasing needs of our customers. So that was nearly 5 years ago, and a lot's changed since then. The market's matured, many other organisations have set their targets, and carbon is now a strategic business priority, not just part of our sustainability offering. So we want to share our progress with you today. And if you would like to know more, we would like you to get in touch and follow up with us. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Adam and Conor.
Thanks, Katy. So we've got to set ourselves a big challenge today. We've never done a webinar just only about net zero, and we've set ourselves the challenge of summarising everything we've achieved over the past 4 or 5 years since we set that target that Katy just mentioned, and where we're going to take it forward. So to do that, I'm going to remind us a little bit more about our targets and how we've achieved against them. I'm going to tell you what we've done to invest in carbon reduction capability in our business. Then I'm going to launch to you some new, more specific targets, interim targets that we've got on our journey to still net zero by 2045. And then we'll finish by sharing some of our thinking about why 2045 is the right target for us and what you can see from us next on our next step. So that's what you can expect to cover over the remainder of this webinar. So thinking back to our targets that Katy mentioned that we launched in 2019, that was net zero emissions by 2045, including our supply chains emissions. So that was our full, for those of you who understand the scope 1 and 2 and 3 terminology for carbon emissions, that was a target that covered our full 3 scopes. And to my knowledge, I think we were the first construction company to set a net zero target, full scope 3 target. We also set an interim target so that we couldn't just wait until nearer the time to achieve it, which was to reduce our emissions by 50% from 2010 by 2030. And we're well on the way with that, as I'll show you in a minute. But it's also important for us at the time not just to set an absolute emissions target, because we didn't know whether our business was going to grow or whether our business was going to shrink over the period between when we set the target and 2045. So we also track carbon intensity, which is a measure of carbon efficiency. It's how many tons of carbon we emit per £1 million worth of revenue. And when we started our data, as I'll show in a minute, we were emitting 347 tons of carbon per million revenue. So we set ourselves a target to half that, become twice as carbon efficient by 2030, with a target of 130 tons. So that was our start point. That's old news. Those are the targets we set in 2019. So how have we done against those? Well, you can see here, this is a graph showing our scope 1, scope 2, and what's called our mandatory scope 3 emissions. So for those who are not familiar with carbon terminology, that basically means the emissions just from Skanska's own operations. Our offices, our company cars, the fuel we procure, the electricity we procure. And you can see we have reduced that over the period of time that's shown from 2010 to date. You can see the percentage reductions, and that's a good thing. That's a great thing. That's what construction companies should be doing to reduce their targets. But that's not the full picture of construction emissions. All the steel, all the concrete, all the emissions from all the suppliers that we put to work to deliver those great projects that we do. And so I'll draw your attention to the quantum on the y-axis of this chart, which you can see the emissions is ranging from around 40,000 tons per year when we started in 2010 to around 10,000 tons in 2021. So it's a relatively small amount. Now, this chart was the crucial difference for us. When we started this journey in 2019, we realized that no major construction companies were reporting on their scope 3 emissions, their full scope emissions, the emissions of their supply chain. Because it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to get the carbon emissions data detailed from the supply chain and from the projects you're working on. So we took an approach to estimate our carbon emissions from 2010. We didn't know the carbon emissions, but we knew what we'd spent. So we were able to convert expenditure into quantities, apply carbon factors to quantities, and then we got the whole approach assessed by an external consultant to make sure we weren't bonkers, and we came up with this. And so we got a pretty well detailed understanding of our full scope 3 carbon emissions footprint. And you can see that there, all of the different components, waste and asphalt, plastic, aggregate, concrete, things you'd expect to see that represents a major construction company. And you can see the quantum, ranging from 200,000 tons of emissions to up to above 400,000 tons of emissions, nearly 10 times the amount of just our own offices and our own company cars. So this represents really something more like the true impact of a construction company. So it's really important when you're assessing what you read in company reports, what's the scope of what's being reported, not just the percentage reduction against what's being reported. And then just to echo some of Katy's comments, we're going to be transparent with everything we do on carbon reduction. So we report these figures every year. We report an update. We report if we've made any corrections. We report if we've had to do any rebaselining. We publish a report on our website, and we keep the historical records up there. You can find all those reports on our website every year on the skanska.uk website. And then on this chart, you can see all of that information drawn together, and you can see our performance. So the blue line shows our absolute emissions track from 2010 to 2021. You can see that the graph sort of spikes up a couple of times, and that sort of tracks our revenue. And that's why we also measure carbon intensity, which is the green line. So you remember I said we started off at an intensity of 347 tonnes per £1 million of revenue. We've got that down to 182,000 tonnes. I can't tell you the 2022 figure yet because we don't report it until later in the year, but I can tell you that it's an improvement in the right direction, lower than 182 tonnes on that way to our 130 in 2030 target. So we've made good progress so far. So those three slides just show you the data. They just show you our emissions. What I'll move on to now is actually try and give you a summary of what we've actually done within the company since that period, since that nearly 4 years ago, since we launched the targets. And at the same time as we launched the targets, we also launched this thing called the Low Carbon Roadmap. Now, I know I'm only a small pixel in the bottom corner of your screen, but I actually have an original vintage version of the Low Carbon Roadmap to show you here as well, one of the original ones. And in that roadmap, it was basically a thinking document for our own leadership. And it covered 6 focus areas, and it outlined how we felt we would need to change our business over the next few years to embed carbon reduction into Skanska UK. In effect, to make us carbon reduction ready to support all of our customers in delivering the decarbonisation aspirations they have for their projects. So how we need to set different targets and different measures. How we need to embed carbon reduction capability into how our commercial and financial teams think about setting and delivering contracts. How we need to increase the requirements for emissions on our plant and transport and collaborate differently. And so we started with that thought leadership document and turned that into a relatively simple series of actions. We set annual plans for the different parts of our business. Each part of our business had to set an annual carbon reduction plan based on this roadmap, relevant to what they were doing in the business to move us forward. And so that was how we started 2019, 2020, 2021. And that's evolved to where we are now, where we're at the final stages of embedding this thinking into our business. And so this year in 2023, we're relaunching a new and upgraded carbon management system, which will embed during 2023 and will be complete in Q1 2024, and we will have finished this first phase of becoming carbon reduction ready, our business capability to support our customers. And so our carbon management system requires carbon reduction thinking, commercially focused carbon reduction thinking, every stage of our cycle, from when we pursue work with our customers, requires us to identify really what our customers are asking for, drawing together the best of Skanska, not just Skanska UK, but global Skanska from all of our networks across our global business to offer the best carbon reduction solutions in the bid for our customers, how to mobilize that and drive that through into project delivery through a carbon management plan that requires our projects to honour and deliver all of the aspects of our low carbon roadmap, whether it's procuring fleet and plan, designing low carbon materials, making sure our people are trained. And then we continue that into project handover and make sure the lessons learned are embedded for future projects. So that's our main effort this year, embedding this final stage of getting our business ready to be carbon reduction, to have a highly capable business to support our customers in reducing carbon. So hopefully that's been a useful, very quick introduction into our strategy of how we've approached this. But I'd like to bring it to life a little bit with you for this next section of the webinar. So we've done so much over the past 4 years, far too many initiatives, far too many carbon reduction solutions for us to share on just a 1-hour webinar. But we've picked what we think are the best examples and a summary of examples to give you an understanding that we're not just doing this on certain flagship projects or in certain areas, but we're embedding this capability everywhere. So I'd like to start with what we've been doing corporately. And we started, as often things do, with our people. So we rolled out a Carbon Academy in 2020, and we're still evolving it now. And initially we identified that actually there were 4 key role types across our business that were crucial in delivering carbon for our customers, that were going to have a disproportionate impact on carbon reduction outcomes. And so we designed courses for those 4 groups. They were operational leaders, project directors, designers, procurers, and our commercial teams. And so we looked out on the market, and actually it was my colleague Conor, who's joining us on the webinar, that designed all of these courses. We looked out on the market, and there were some off-the-shelf courses that you could get around carbon literacy and the science of climate change, the why. But our people already understood the why, so we needed to deliver courses about the how. So our courses are commercially focused. They're about what innovations are going to be coming online over the next 5 to 10 years that we can apply to projects. What are the commercial implications of applying carbon reduction solutions to projects? The different carbon reduction solutions have different cost implications on different contract types, really equipping our people to understand what the business of carbon reduction will be to support customers. So when you work with Skanska, you get trained operational leaders, procurers and designers on carbon reduction. And today we've trained nearly 500 of those key roles, and we're continuing to do that. But what else we've done corporately is around 3 themes that you'll see recurring through this webinar, in the project examples I gave and also in the thought leadership at the end, around transport and diesel emissions and around concrete and steel. And we started off our journey corporately to transition away from diesel through HVO. We did that in 2021. I think we were probably, if not the first, one of the first large construction companies to do this. We purely HVO company now. We've procured nearly 5.5 million litres and avoided over 12,000 tonnes of HVO since we procured. So we're really well aware that not every organisation in the industry has taken the same stance on HVO as we have, and we expect any company to take the appropriate stance for them. Our approach was we needed to assure ourselves of 2 things. One was we put significant scrutiny into the sustainable supply of the HVO that we're procuring from green biofuels, and we're confident of the sustainability of that supply. And the second factor was we were convinced that the procurement of HVO was less harmful to the climate than just sticking with traditional red diesel. So those were our decisions. We're very happy with the decision on HVO there, and if those factors change, we'll review that. But we're happy using HVO as a transition fuel. But it is a transition fuel, and so we've also been focused on investing in scaling up electric and hydrogen solutions to our transport issues. We started that at home with our electric vehicle first policy, which we rolled out a couple of years ago. So I won't go through this slide in detail, but you can see in the charts, our company car vehicle fleet has actually shrunk in the last couple of years, but you can see the proportion of electric vehicles has vastly increased, and the rest of our fleet is hybrid and BEV. In fact, we've completely stopped ordering anything that isn't a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, a hybrid, or an electric vehicle. No purely combustion engine vehicles are ordered in our fleet anymore, and we've supported that with rolling out electric vehicle chargers. 100 at our head office, where we're broadcasting from here today, from Leavesden Park, and chargers right across our project sites as well. I'd like to show you another slide just for comparison, because it will come up useful towards the end of the webinar when we're showing our new targets. So this chart shows on the left-hand side, on the dark blue chart bars, you can see the UK company car fleet average from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. And then you can see Skanska UK's fleet average in those lighter grey bars, and you can see we're now working towards nearly 50% lower emissions than the UK fleet average. And you can see in the green bars our projections for how we're going to continue that. And as I say, that'll come up later. So it's just a useful chart to show. As I said, it's not just electric, which we think the future of transport, it's also hydrogen. And we're learning a lot about hydrogen, as I think the industry is. You'll see a few more examples of hydrogen solutions in the project slides I'll go through in a minute. But this is probably the biggest business intervention we're making. We're in a consortium with BAM Nuttall and BRE for, we were successful in the first phase of funding for the red diesel replacement scheme, which was run by BEIS. I know BEIS has been reconstituted now into different government departments, so I'm not sure where that's ended up. But we're now in the process of bidding for the second phase of that scheme, where we're exploring how the hydrogen economy will work for the construction industry in terms of charging infrastructure, the uses of hydrogen fuel, and where it's best placed to work on construction sites. So that's something we're really excited about and will play a big part in our future. And then I also mentioned steel and concrete, that really huge parts of our carbon footprint, huge part of the industry's carbon footprint. I'll talk about these two initiatives that we've signed up to with the climate group in more detail when I get to our new sub-targets later in the webinar. But we've really been focused on steel and concrete in our business. We've formed a low carbon materials steering group, which is chaired by me, has a number of our environmental colleagues on, and engineering and technical directors from across our business to drive low carbon concrete and steel solutions into our business, which you'll see as we go through. And we signed up to the climate group's Steel Zero initiative, which is an industry buying signals initiative to drive the industry towards net zero steel. We're a founding signature to that. And then we're also a founding signatory to Climate Group's Concrete Zero initiative, which is again another industry buying signal initiative to drive the industry towards net zero concrete. And so again, I'll talk more specifically about those targets when we launch our sub-targets later on in the webinar. So those are the main initiatives we've put in place corporately. And what I want to do now is take you through, very quickly, examples from our four main business sectors to show you, as I said before, we've got far more examples than we could possibly show you on the webinar, but to show you an example of the kind of approach each of our sectors is taking to support our customers and to deliver the principles from our low carbon roadmap. So I'll start with our infrastructure and civils sector. And for all of our sectors, you'll see it starts with design and estimating. So we're applying the latest carbon digitals, latest BIM technology to make sure that we're designing the best, most commercially efficient carbon reduction solutions out on all of our projects and give our customers the best solutions. This is an example from the A428 project. It's a cost carbon dashboard developed in collaboration with Mott MacDonald for our customer National Highways. There, we're able to track all of the assets on the highway scheme, understand the implications on cost and carbon so that we can design the best solutions. And you'll see on the next slide some of those solutions that we're able to deliver. I'm showing three projects here, examples from three projects. The first one is another project for National Highways, our M42 scheme, which is a traffic improvement scheme for some of the local area and very important industrial sector in M42. National Highways, of course, have a very ambitious 2040 target for the maintenance and construction of their roads. So we're committed to supporting them achieve that with the best carbon solutions that we can. On that project, we delivered a low carbon concrete trial where we used a alkali activated geopolymer cement replacement, which is 80% lower emissions than traditional cement, along with a basalt reinforcement solution, which emits around 60% less emissions than a traditional steel solution. So really good carbon reduction solution there that we're now trying to scale up on other projects. And then we've also used our design capability to think differently about how we can do earthworks. So by reducing the requirement to do earthworks excavations on that project, we've reduced our emissions about 15% from baseline, as well as saving our customer around 2.8 million savings. And then we also increased our earthworks efficiency by partnering with a local HS2 project, saving another 560 tons of emissions through avoided earthwork saving. So we move to the two projects on the right-hand side of the slide. These are both Network Rail projects. Network Rail have very large rail network, of course, with a target to decarbonise that by 2050. And we've been working hard to support them doing that. At Euston IP Central, we've procured, where we're redeveloping the station there, we've procured electric arc furnace steel, which is 88% lower emissions than traditional blast furnace steel alternatives. And we've also been using another lower carbon concrete cement alternative called ground granulated blast furnace slag, which is an alternative mix, which has saved around 30 tons of carbon for that project. And then the SAS13 bridge, which is a bridge replacement scheme around Birmingham. And by really focusing and using our design capability, we've reused materials, used lower carbon concrete mixes, and de-scoped part of the design to save around 7,000 tons from the baseline there. But our largest project, and I think in the infrastructure space, and I think probably the largest project in the UK construction industry, is High Speed 2. And of course, we're working on this in joint venture with Costain and Strabag, so our carbon reductions are a collaborative solution there. HS2 have a target of 2035, very ambitious target for construction and operation of their assets. And so we're working very hard to deliver that. There are so many solutions to share on this project. We've just picked, including us delivering HS2's first diesel-free sites. But on this slide, we've just picked three really interesting, what we think are really interesting solutions. At the Victoria Road crossover box, which is just where the trains change track before they enter and leave the station, we've been using hydrogen power units, GeoPura hydrogen power units for site power, which we think will save 500 tons of emissions over their life cycle. At Atlas Road, we've been designing a tower gantry crane base, where we've been using earth-friendly concrete and reduced steel, and for that solution, we'll save around 50 tons of emissions. And then for the Euston approaches to the HS2 Euston station, we've been using another cement replacement. It's a 70% replacement mix, which will save around 157 tons of emissions from the baseline. So again, you see it's transport and cement and steel that are at the forefront of the solutions that we're pushing on our projects. And then finally, we're remiss not to include our long-standing partnership with Anglian Water in what we present today. Anglian Water, I think, were probably the first largest organisation in our industry to set a proper carbon neutral target for the full scope of their emissions. And they've been leading the way on carbon reduction ever since. We've been happy to support them as a part of a collaborative partner, as part of their At-One Alliance, supporting them in significant carbon reductions in the capital and operational phases, and then supporting as well through things like an Ofwat funded project to support them developing a carbon modeler and how they can hotspot, even better make carbon reduction hotspots through BIM tools. So that's our infrastructure sector. So I'll move on now to our second major sector, which is our piling, foundations and ground engineering business, which you might know is based out of our facility in Bentley Works up near Doncaster, South Yorkshire. And so that's a picture of Bentley Works. We refurbished that to a near zero environmental impact facility in 2015, using things like natural lighting, cooling, solar panels, dual fuel heating that uses biomass and H2O. We're able to achieve a reduction in 40% energy usage in the office, in the workshop, and a quarter, 25% energy reduction in the offices up there. It's a fantastic facility. But in terms of what we actually deliver on our projects, again in this sector, it starts by estimating and designing with carbon in mind. We use an estimating and design tool called the Foundation, and that immediately plugs in carbon calculations from the EFC carbon calculator, which I know many of you will know is the European Foundation the European Federation for Foundation Contractors. That's their carbon calculator. So just as with infrastructure projects, we design our cementation projects with carbon in mind right from the beginning, and we're able to achieve some fantastic results. I'll show you a couple of those results related to concrete. This one's reasonably hot off the press. We've been collaborating with supplier Hanson to develop a 79% cement replacement mix for all of our permanent piling works on High Speed 2, which is, we're working on stage 1 there. We think this is the lowest carbon concrete of equivalent strength to be approved for use in permanent piling works. It's going to be about 45% lower emissions than the baseline. We've worked hard together collaboratively with our customer HS2 to get that approved. And we think it's going to save around 4,600 tonnes of emissions over the remaining 40,000 metre cubed of concrete that's still to be piled into that project. Another example we won an award for. Again, we used that same technology we tried on the M42, which was basalt reinforcement steel with low carbon concrete, but this time we applied it in a low carbon guide wall system as part of our foundations business, and we won the 2022 Carbon Reduction Award from the Federation of Piling Specialists for that intervention, which we're pretty proud of. And so we are working on concrete and steel solutions in our piling business, but also we've got to think about our rigs. Traditionally, very diesel heavy foundation and piling business. So we've got to be at the forefront of decarbonising that. This is an image of our new Bauer EBG33 piling rig, for any of you are piling rig aficionados on the call. It's an electric piling rig, one of the only ones in the UK, and we're saving about 1.2 tonnes of emissions per day through the use of that. But we're also trialling hydrogen, and it's through our foundation business that we're mostly working on that hydrogen consortium that I mentioned earlier in the webinar. And so we're also trialling one of our own dual fuel hydrogen and diesel piling rigs. So there's a hydrogen dual fuel retrofit there, and that's forecast to run at about 50% lower emissions than a traditional rig. So we're trialing both hydrogen and electric solutions there. Moving on to our building unit. So just like infrastructure and cementation, it starts with digital design. So in our building unit, we use carbon and cost rates for the packages that we estimate, and then we get into detailed design. And then we use a 5D model plugged into 5D BIM data system plugged into a 3D modeling tool that you can see now, where we're doing that exact same detailed design, looking at every single component, every single aspect of the building, and working out how we can reduce the carbon emissions to give the lowest commercially efficient carbon reduction solution to our customer. Actually, although you can't see it on this slide, through this 3D model of London allows us to zoom out and then zoom into different buildings that we're designing across London, all on the same 3D map. And then we're plugging in different tools into this. So what you can see on the screen here is a new reuse of second-hand materials tool that we're using. So this plugs into the 3D model. It links in all of the steel components of the building design, compares that with what live recycled steel is available on the market, and then tracks that into the model. So we're able to use recycled steel wherever it's available and will fit our design using a live link tool. So that's, again, an example of how we're doing digital design. Now this project, 105 Victoria Street, is one I'm excited to share with you. And it's actually the only project I'm showing on the webinar that we haven't actually started building yet. And the reason why I'm sharing with you is because I wanted to highlight the ambitious sustainability ambitions of our client, Bentley Green Oak. We're aspiring for this to be an ultra-sustainable project. It's going to be the UK's largest net zero office. It's going to be an all-electric building, and we're really excited to be part of it. But what's really interesting from this part of the webinar is how Bentley Green Oak and how we are approaching the design. We're including full supply chain in assessing the full scope 3 options for every part of the design. That's being tracked through design control into every aspect of the design is scrutinized for carbon reduction solutions, and that's flowing through into contract packages. So this is a really cutting edge, progressive, focused approach to designing lower carbon buildings. And we're going to learn a lot from it. We're really excited to see what the client can achieve from this project. But here are some projects that we either have completed or are close to completing. 2 commercial building developments, Featherstone for our client Derwent London, which is a redevelopment up around Old Street in London, and Norton Folgate for our client British Land around Blossom Street, where we've been using our design approach to rethink about facades. So in Featherstone, we redesigned the facade from what was a hand-laid brick system to a unitized glass-reinforced concrete facade, saving around 273 tons of emissions in the embodied phase. And then a similar approach to modern methods of construction at Norton Folgate, where we've used ultra-high performance concrete, and that's projected to deliver around 20% emissions against the baseline. And both of these customers are developers committed to net zero by 2030 for their developments as part of the Building Better Partnerships climate change commitment, which we're committed to supporting them on. And then the third image, that's a picture of the office we're in now. That's Leavesden Park, which we really only recently refitted and saved around over 12 tons of carbon through our use of internal temporary hoarding. And then by refurbishing rather than replacing around 650 meters of lighting, we saved around 17 tons of emissions. So you can see those are just a few examples of what we're doing around structure and fabric of the buildings that we build for ourselves and for our customers. But it's not just the structure and fabrics, it's how we do the site setup. So you'll see when I launch the carbon targets shortly that we're going to be focused on what we can achieve around site setup, and our building business has been a trailblazer for that. So for an office we built for Zurich in Swindon, we assessed 12 low carbon solutions to improve the low carbon site setup, including eco cabins, EV charging points, how we procured electricity, and we achieved over an 86% reduction on our emissions baseline on that building. And then at VSSB, which is the Vehicle Storage and Support Program, it's basically a big military vehicle storage unit in Tewkesbury for the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. We've taken a similar approach in delivering lower carbon site setup there. And those are lessons we're going to learn and scale up across our business for all our customers. And then just moving on to our final sector, building services. So not traditional construction, but where we work in FM, facilities management, and where we work in mechanical and electric, MEP, building fit out and retrofit. And so it's a different approach here. So I'll show you, again, from the many examples we could show, an example from a public client and from a private client. This is an image of Walsall Manor Hospital for the NHS, whose net zero target is 2045. And what we do there, for a lot of the heating and cooling and air conditioning solutions, we'll replace refrigerants. And refrigerants are measured on what's something called GWP, which is global warming potential. So in this example, we've switched out a higher GWP refrigerant to a lower GWP refrigerant, saving around 222 tons of emissions in the operation of that hospital. And a completely different example is one of our project with Virtus data centers, where we've used our procurement of hydro-treated vegetable oil, HVO, to run in their generators and combine that with a new approach to load management. So the generators are only working when the system really needs it. We're able to save over 66 tons of emissions and the client around £7,000 on that one. And then apart from 4x4s, which I'll come on to, which mainly we use in our infrastructure projects, our largest light commercial fleet is in our building services business. So I've chosen to show you an example from our Scottish facilities management fleet up here. So over the past year or two, we've been making significant interventions in transitioning our commercial fleet up there to electric vehicles, but also focusing on green travel solutions such as commuting, public transport. And through those interventions, since the project started, we've been able to reduce our emissions across that fleet by around 75%, with a carbon saving of around 67.5 tons, which is fantastic. And also just an interesting fact up there, we recently trialled a hydrogen and electric dual fuel van across our Midlothian school site. Completed that to see what the results are, but that's the first electric and hydrogen vehicle we've used in Skanska, so that's quite exciting. And then finally, I wanted to just celebrate the fact that we are measured every year through something called the SFMI, the Sustainable Facilities Management Index, which is an organization that tracks facilities management companies on their sustainability credentials. We've been graded platinum on this, I think, for the last 9 years. We've been top several times, and we've been joint winners for the last 2 years. And in the recent win, the SFMI congratulated us for our advanced approach to Scope 3 carbon data in terms of FM, which is really good. Now, I'll just close this section by sharing a product that we're in the process of launching to the market, which is carbon focused. It's called Intellect. It's a cloud-based software which creates a digital twin of a built environment asset or a building, links that data to sensors in the building and also to the building management system, particularly lighting and ventilation solutions. We're using that on our own building. You can see that image there is of our London office at 51 Moorgate. And since we've been using our Intellect product, we've been able to make a 35% energy efficiency saving and also a 10% FM cost efficiency gain by understanding where we can make efficiencies and how we maintain. So that's a really useful cost and carbon efficient solution we're offering to the market to improve the energy of built environment assets. And so with that, I hope that's been a useful spin, very quick spin through what we're doing across all of the sectors that we're working. The purpose of that is not to show you everything that we're doing, because that would be impossible, but to give you an understanding that we're trying to embed this thinking and the implication of our carbon roadmap everywhere in our business. So I hope that's been useful for that one. So now I'll move on to our new targets. You got a hint of those in the, if you logged onto the webinar 5 minutes before and you saw the animation, but we've got more targets than that, and I'm delighted now to talk you through them. So this is now our new suite of specific net zero targets on our way to 2045. So I mentioned that graph earlier on when we were talking about the company car fleet. We're committing to continuing to improve the emissions of our company car fleet. So they will be down below 35 grams of carbon per kilometre driven by the end of this year. By the end of next year, 60% of our fleet will be fully battery electric vehicles, by which time we'll have got our fleet average down below 20 carbon emissions per kilometre by the end of 2024. So really ambitious targets to reduce our fleet emissions. By 2025, 30% of the concrete we procure and supply will comply with that concrete zero target I mentioned earlier. So concrete zero issue a threshold of how much, how they define low carbon concrete and how much you have to procure of it in order to maintain your commitment. And part of that, our overall carbon intensity as a business will be at or below 160 tonnes per million revenue by 2025, so that's just a couple of years away. And by then, all of our projects will have a carbon baseline and will set and monitor against a carbon budget. Now, most of our big projects already do, most of our big building and infrastructure projects, all of our already do, but we have a lot of small projects in our cementation and building services businesses, which don't necessarily have that, but they will do by 2025. By 2027, all of our light road going commercial fleet will be net zero. And by 2028, all of our company cars we order will be zero emissions. We won't order anything that isn't zero emission. And just at this point, I'd like to highlight the footnotes, which you may not be able to read when you're watching this, but you will be able to see when we publish these on our website later today, and when we send you the follow-up material. I should note that the targets that relate to our company fleet, both the fleet average and the others, only relate to our company fleet. We haven't set targets for those people who own their own cars and gain a car allowance, or for short-term hires yet. We haven't got a solution or a target for those yet. That's something we're working on. So back to the targets. By 2029, we'll celebrate 10 years of certification to the PAS 2080 Carbon Management in Infrastructure specification. We were the first major contractor to become certified to that 10 years before, in 2019. By 2030, we will specify and procure 50% of our steel and concrete will comply with those commitments we've made to steel zero and to concrete zero. And I mentioned in the building section, all of our site setup will be zero emission. And we define site setup as 5 categories: electricity, generators, lighting, hoarding, and welfare accommodation. Moving on, also in 2030, we'll celebrate 20-year record of transparent Scope 3 emissions estimating and reporting, and all of our commercial buildings will support our developer targets in achieving net zero by 2030, according to the Building Better Partnerships Net Zero Carbon Pathway. Then you can see in the middle of the graph there just a restatement of our original targets to be 50% reduced on our Scope 3 by 2010, and have our intensity at 130 emissions per million revenue by 2030. And then by 2030, all of our 4x4s we're committing to being zero emission by the end of 2030. And then this moves us to the last few years of our target cycle. By 2045, all our heavy goods vehicles and plant, including mobile plant, will be zero emission. 100% of the steel and concrete we procure will be net zero. That means we'll meet our climate group concrete zero and steel zero targets 5 years ahead of those public commitments. And that brings us in to our main target of net zero by 2045 across all our scopes. So that was a lot of detail to take in. I've just happily given you a very quick summary of those targets. As I say, they will be available on our website this afternoon, and we will be sending them out to you, so you'll be able to scrutinize them at your leisure. But for now, I wanted to start the next section where we ended the last section, which is the year of 2045. We set our target at 2045 back in 2019. We haven't changed that target. Other companies, as Katy mentioned, have set different targets, some earlier, some later than us, and we support those targets. Some of those targets are right for those companies. But I want to now hand over to our carbon manager, Conor McCone, who's instrumental in helping us set these targets, just to explain why we feel and continue to feel that 2045 is the right target for us. Conor.
Great, thanks Adam. So my name's Conor McCone. I'm the carbon manager for Skanska UK, and I sit in the central team working on our carbon strategy, but also supporting our projects and our customers to reduce carbon wherever possible. So as Adam said, what I'd like to cover today is why we still think net zero by 2045 is the best target for us, and some of the thinking about how we got to that target and how we review it continuously as well. So to create our 2045 target, we used the following principles that you can see on the screen here. We wanted it first and foremost to be ambitious but achievable. So we wanted to set it in a realistic time frame. We didn't want to set it too early and then have to reset it and lose some momentum. So that was really key when we first came up with it. Then secondly, we wanted to back it with the latest and best available industry data. And this is something that we do continuously. We horizon scan throughout our industry and any of the supply chains that engage with us to ensure that we have got the best data, and any developments that we see we'll incorporate in our future projections as well. And if there is some technological leaps in the future, we would be open to re-evaluating that target and bringing it in if we feel that could be achieved. Thirdly, we wanted it to be transparent on the scale of the challenge. So we've set it at 2045. That's 2 decades away from now. And we think really we'll be having to really push and put a lot of effort into that year on year between now and 2045. And not just us, or the whole industry and our supply chain as well. So we really wanted to be transparent, and that's why we've set it as we have at 2045. And then finally, as Adam has mentioned throughout the presentation, we include our whole supply chain within that, and that includes multiple industries. It also includes cutting edge innovation and technology over the coming years. So you have these far to be it carbon intense industries like the concrete, steel and automotive industries, but also you've got really exciting carbon capture storage technology which is coming up in the future, but just isn't a proven technology yet. So just to give you an overview of Skanska's emissions breakdown, this is it for 2021. you can see our top three emissions contributors are steel, concrete and cement, and plant and equipment. So steel and concrete alone make up 60% of our total emissions annually. And when you add plant and equipment to that, that brings it up to about 71%. So it was really integral for us to really concentrate on these three industries when setting our target and when looking into the projections to the future to ensure that they could be achieved. So just to go over some of the major emission sources and net zero targets that are out there on the market today. And Adam has taken you through the concrete zero and the steel zero initiative commitments that they've set at 2050. And those initiatives think that for concrete and steel, these targets are ambitious but achievable, but not until 2050. For HGVs and heavy plant, the UK government has set a target for no new HGVs to be sold, or for all new HGVs to be sold after 2040 has to be net zero. The key word there is new. So it'll only be new HGVs and zero emission, or will be zero emissions after 2040, and anything prior to that that isn't will still take time to filter out of our supply chain. These are large, expensive bits of kit, and they can take a while to filter out of the supply chain just through the investment cycles. The same goes for commercial vehicles and cars. So the UK government's ban on sale of new internal combustion engines in cars and vans starts at 2030, and again that will take a while to trickle down out of the supply chains to remove the carbon from those vehicles. So what do these decarbonisation pathways mean to us at Skanska? We've never shown this before, but this is actually what we've been using this method since 2019, and we've used it when working with our executive management team to create our net zero target. So you can probably recognise from 2010 to 2022 from the previous graphs, they are Skanska UK's emissions. And then what we've done, we've applied the latest industry decarbonised pathways to the UK, Skanska UK emissions out to 2050. This is something we continually review and update to assess our target with the most current information available. And as I said previously, if we get signals that we could get there quicker, we would then possibly reevaluate our target. But you can see from the graph, using the current ambitious, optimistic sector roadmaps, the industry won't get to net zero until around 2050. And as we've mentioned today, we're going to push to get there 5 years quicker than that. How we intend to do that is continue to be market leaders on low carbon technology and methodologies. We'll use the latest innovation wherever and whenever they become available. And then lastly, we're going to continue to collaborate across the industry to drive carbon reductions wherever possible. So we still believe that 2045 is an ambitious but achievable target for us at Skanska UK. We recognise some sectors, organisations or projects could get there sooner, but as a multi-sector major contractor, we have no data to suggest how we could get there any quicker with current industry thinking or projections. So to go into this challenge in a bit more detail, I'll pass you back to Adam, and he'll talk about what some of the things that we're doing to overcome these.
Thank you, Conor. And just before I continue to talk about what Conor said, we are on the run into the webinar, and I think that technical hitch that we had at the beginning of the webinar is just putting us over a bit. So apologies, we may run over by 5 minutes and not bring you on the nose at 1 p.m. So hopefully you can bear with us with that. But thank you for describing why we feel and why we use evidence to feel confident that 2045 is the right target for us, even though we'll certainly get there sooner for the customers that we work for that have targets that are more ambitious than that. So what I wanted to talk about, and just to draw us into the close of the webinar, is obviously the first part of the webinar was looking back at what we've done, setting targets, things we've achieved, how we've embedded our low carbon roadmap, evolved that into a carbon management system, and we're spending the rest of 2023 and 2024 embedding that. And when we've done that, we feel we will have embedded carbon reduction capability into our BU such that we can just continually improve. We will have made significant investments in doing that, and hopefully you'll recognise that. But building on what Conor said, what we think our next steps are going to be are focusing on these deep decarbonisation agenda items and collaborating at industry level. So just building on what Conor said, this slide shows probably something you're all familiar with. They're the DFT, Department for Transport, targets for when manufacturers can have to stop selling emitting vehicles for different weight vehicle types. The big one there is HGVs, heavy goods vehicles above 26 tonnes. It'll be illegal to sell those. DFT's aiming to end the sale of emitting HGVs from 2040 onwards. So as Conor says, that means there's still going to be a raft of those vehicles across the UK and in the market. So we've got to find a way to make that go quicker, to collaborate with our supply chain, to work with different standards in the manufacturers, to drive that buying signal to go forward. And the challenge is even bigger with concrete and steel. Many of you have seen this Mineral Products Association UK Concrete and Cement Industry Roadmap. And let me just make sure I emphasize this quickly. This is a roadmap from probably one of the most respected bodies on concrete in the UK. It takes ambitious forecasts and still forecasts that concrete will only be decarbonised to net zero by 2050. And it uses ambitious reductions such as zero carbon transport, we just talked about, around using different fuels, around changing product standards. And then if you look there, you can see that yellow bar, 61% of the emissions reduction required to achieve net zero by 2050 is from an unproven, unscaled up as yet technology called carbon capture and storage. And it's not as yet clear to us that the UK has a clear plan to scale up carbon capture and storage technology to achieve that. And you know, concrete might only be 1.5% of the UK's emissions, but it's actually around 10% of our Skanska UK emissions. It's really important. Exactly the same for steel. You can see on this UK structural steelwork 2050 decarbonisation roadmap. Again, steel is about 2.5 of UK emissions, but it's about a quarter when you put all the different steel types we use of our Skanska UK emissions. So it's crucial. And again, this very well respected body says that all of these these innovations and these changes have to happen just for the steel industry in the UK to get to net zero by 2050. So use of direct steel making emission reductions, changes in circular economy, how we design steel, how we transport and fabricate, excuse me, how we fabricate it. And then again, 25% of the emissions of steel are forecasted to be delivered emissions reduction through carbon capture and storage again. So in order for these two deep decarbonisation issues, such as steel and concrete, we need to scale up and change so many standards, have changes to policy, changes to standards and specs, have new technologies invested in and scaled up. And we really support that, and Skanska is going to get behind that. But it's too early to say that we're going to get there much quicker than these respected roadmaps suggest that we might. So our next steps, we're now going to pivot over the next few years from getting our own house in order, which was the initial phase of our carbon reduction plan, to moving externally, to showing industry leadership and driving down industry change in some of these areas. So that's what you can expect to see more from us in our next steps to net zero, even more assertive in collaborating with our customers on innovating with our supply chain around some of these decarbonisation issues to create strong partnerships to work together, and action on advocacy towards government and towards industry and manufacturers so that we can work more swiftly on these deep decarbonisation issues. So that has been our summary of hopefully communicating to what we've been achieving, what we've been working on around the issue of net zero in Skanska UK. I hope it's been useful. I can't wait to see some of the questions that you've been asking. Looking forward to answering those comprehensively. And to draw it to a close, I'm delighted to reintroduce Katy to bring the webinar to a close and to say thank you. Katy.
Brilliant, thanks ever so much, Adam, and thank you, Conor, for a really comprehensive and transparent presentation. I can see there's over 100 questions in the Q&A, so I think you're going to do your work cut out getting those replied to. They're really good questions as well, so thank you for your participation with those. So just to close out for us, the message I really want to get across is we are going to continue at Skanska to be serious about our steps, carbon reduction. And it's not just about selected customers or just something that's being done by the environment team. This is really at the heart of our values. And we're going to be doing it across all of our work. And it's going to be led by operations, procurement and design with support from the environment team. So it's across our business. We want to bring the best thinking and capability of all of our projects, because that really matters to us. And we will be transparent. So we will report our emissions annually. We'll be honest about why our target date is 2045 and why we use HBO. We're not going to duck the issues. I think it's too important to do that. But of course, we recognise we can't do this on our own. We work in an ecosystem, and that's why we're part of initiatives such as Steel Zero, Concrete Zero, and CLC Construct Zero. So this webinar we see as our start of our opportunity to collaborate even more widely. We're going to share the information, and we really want you to get in touch. And I see that a number raised that in the Q&A. We want you to get in touch if you want to follow up with us and collaborate any further. So thank you all very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.